My guest today began sailing at the age of 5 in Wisconsin and was drawn to the thrill of competition and ambitious goals at that early age. She had a successful junior sailing career and went on to sail and study at Old Dominion University. She earned a degree in finance, captained the sailing team, and became a two-time All-American. After college, she raced on small keelboats, earning world, national, and North American titles, and was named Rolex Yachtswoman of the Year in 2014. She competed in the Tokyo 2020 and Paris 2024 Olympics in the women's skiff class. In the process, she won two Pan American Game medals, a World Championship medal, and World Cup medals, as well as achieving a world ranking of third. Pretty amazing. I met her at a client of mine that helped sponsor her journey, and she sat in the meetings and then did a great discussion on performance mindset at lunchtime and was really excited to get her on the show. Her name is Stephanie Roble. Stephanie, thanks for being on the show. Welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, and it amazes me. You began sailing at age 5. I think I was still figuring out like how not to suck my thumb at age 5. Like, how do you get started? And yeah, let me start here before I ask the question I ask at the beginning of every episode about a leadership team. I want to hit this first. How do you actually get started sailing at age 5? Was it something your family was into and you just went along, or how did that work?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small lake in Wisconsin, and in the summer, that's what everyone on the lake would do is go sailing. And so sailing lessons started at age 5, and I think my parents were pretty keen to get me out of the house. So they signed me up for lessons. And early on, I was actually really intimidated by the sport, and I really didn't like it. But eventually I fell in love with it because it was a way to be on the water, which I just absolutely loved, playing in the water, being in the sun, being with my friends. And so fell in love with that, and then I started competing and won my first race and really got the itch to bring that, you know, all throughout my life.
That's incredible. And I definitely want to dive in deeper to that journey, but really excited about this because you're the first Olympian we've ever had on the show. And
Honored.
that is a big deal. I'm honored. That's a really big deal. And also I love what got me really interested in talking to you. And I've only done this, I think, once before on the show, is I love the intersection of sports leadership and business leadership and how that works together. I think those are so related. So really excited to talk to you about all this stuff and dive into your journey. But normally the first question, I guess this will be the second question I'm asking is, from all of your experience, what do you believe is the one most important characteristic of a great team?
I would say it's communication. When I think back on both of my Olympic campaigns, I was with the same teammate for both of them. We sail on a small boat. It's only 16 feet long. It's the two of us on board. And there's, as you can imagine, in sailing, there's a lot going on. We're battling the wind, we're battling the waves, we're battling other competitors, we're figuring out, how to read the wind the best, we're making game plans, we're working together to maximize the boat's efficiency through the water, and we're making moves on the other boats, and there's just a lot going on. And so for us to be successful on the water took a really high level of communication, very specific words, very concise statements. And so we really worked hard on honing that in throughout our career. But then off the water, it was basically us and our coach and a little bit of leadership from the federation. But the way things are structured within the sailing community in the United States, we were essentially running our own small business. We did all of our fundraising, we did all of our logistics, we did a lot of our strategic planning. We were constantly trying to figure out how to make the most of our time on and off the water. And so it took a lot of communication, and we're in a high pressure environment with, a lot at stake and this ultimate goal of winning an Olympic medal. And you work 4 years, 8 years for that one dream. And so there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot going on behind the scenes, and it all came down to communication.
How much of that communication is technique? Like when we want to say this thing that could be that could take a minute to say, we're going to say it in 5 seconds. Like, how much of it is technique and code and things like that versus kind of the softer part of it of really getting to know each other and trusting one another?
That's a really good question. From a performance standpoint, purely on the water, it was all about creating those clear, concise statements. And we would, as technology evolved during our Olympic campaigns, we actually ended up using like GoPros and voice recorders during racing and during our training so that we could hear how we're talking to each other. And as we all know, there's so much about, it's not sometimes not what you say, it's how you say it. And so, a big thing for us was if Maggie, my teammate, said something to me, and I would always say copy. But if I was like annoyed or at a situation and I was like copy, that comes off a lot different, right? So, it comes down to the details of communication. But then, like you said, it's also about understanding each other. Like we were very different people at the end of the day, and we put a lot of effort into understanding each other and understanding what Maggie needs in order to perform and what I need in order to perform.
And that's so important. And obviously, that's a great example of where sports and business are so similar, is that you do have those differences that not only impact how you communicate, but I imagine those differences were pretty important in the strength of the team.
Yeah.
If you were both I mean, did that come into play? Were there strengths in each other you can kind of leverage through those differences?
100%. And that's where we put a lot of effort in, especially with our coach and sports psychologist, was understanding those differences and how do we leverage them? For example, Maggie's a very direct communicator and I would often kind of struggle with that. But then once I opened myself up to being more open to direct communication and, taking that on myself, I was able to, kind of open up a whole new level for us.
Beautiful. So I want to step back to your journey and then get into the performance mindset and dive a little deeper on the things we're starting to talk about. But you start sailing at the age of 5.
Mhm.
Love that competition. When is that there kind of the glimmer of the dream, or maybe stronger than a glimmer? When do you start dreaming that, hey, maybe I want to get to the Olympics one day?
It came at a very early age. Like basically once I saw sailing in the Olympics, I was like, I want to do that. And, I grew up in a household where watching the Olympics was something we did for the winter and summer games. I remember watching the opening ceremonies and I remember just feeling the magic around the Olympics at a really young age. And then once I started competing and doing well at a junior sailing level, it was just something I always wanted to do. And I didn't take the traditional pathway to the Olympics. Usually in the US at least, you have your successful junior sailing career, you go to college, you do college sailing, and then right out of college, you focus on your Olympics. I didn't feel like I had the resources to put together a successful Olympic team at that point. Obviously, sailing is a very expensive and resource heavy sport. And if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it the right way. So I actually went into the small keelboat racing, which you talked about in my introduction. And then in the fall of 2016, Maggie, who was a teammate of mine in high school sailing, and we competed against each other in college sailing, she called me and said, hey, I really want to sail with you. Like, I have a boat, let's go do this. And it was at a perfect time in my life where I was ready to transition into something else. And I said to myself, it's now or never. And I stopped the sailing that I was doing in that industry and said, all right, let's go all in on this.
And as leading up to Tokyo 2020, the first Olympics you were in, tell me a little bit about that journey and some of the struggles and some of the things you learned in getting there. What was that like?
Yeah, I would say the first Olympic journey was so much about learning the fundamentals. I was brand new to the boat. I didn't have any experience in it. And so I was really focused on learning the fundamentals and then translating that into racing. And I remember reaching a specific point where we were getting quite good and being recognized on the international scene. But I started putting so much pressure on myself, and to the point where I would freeze on the race course. I would come up on a decision point, and as the skipper of the team, I was the one in charge of making the decisions. And so I would come up to a decision point on the race course and I would freeze because I was so afraid of making the wrong decision and how that would impact our results. I became very results focused. And so my coach pulled me aside and said, "Hey, you have so much potential as an athlete and as a team, and we need to address this." And so I linked up with a sports psychologist and put in a ton of work into mindset and really focusing on the process of everything and digging into the why I was feeling that pressure and fear. And we did a lot of really great work together. In 2019, we sailed a world championship where we were like high teens in the results, maybe so 16, 17, something like that. And the next world championship in 2020, we won a bronze medal. And that is all because of the mental work that I put in.
So I want to dig into this freezing on decisions a little bit, because as you said that again, I'm like, oh my God, that happens to business
Yeah.
leaders all the time. And I find that a number of leaders I work with really struggle with believing they've got to get every decision right,
Mhm.
that there's one magic right answer. They've got to get it right. And that can cause them to overanalyze and totally miss an opportunity. So dig a little deeper on the mindset around making quick decisions. What was it specifically that you struggled with there, and what allowed you to switch and become better and quicker at making decisions?
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a good point there. When we come on decision points, it's easy to have that paralysis by analysis, and that's exactly what was happening to me. I think I was overthinking all of the options and not trusting my gut. I think your gut can and your intuition can tell you so much. And you're right. We're so tempted to want to make every decision the right way when in reality that's impossible. And so I think sailing is a really good platform for teaching us adaptability. Things are happening so quickly and there's so many things that are out of our control that we just have to figure out how to react to and make the most out of. Like the wind, for example, it comes off the land and it bends at different angles and you don't always know how it's going to hit your boat or how it's going to impact the boats around you. And so you constantly have to be reevaluating, where am I? What are the other boats doing? What do I want? And then evaluating your risk versus reward behind that. So I think, I just leaned into that idea of becoming more adaptable. I studied a lot of our GPS trackers from the racing. So that helped build my confidence for better decision making on the race course. And then, saying to myself, I trust myself and I'm going to learn from this. And I think that was a really big mindset shift.
Yeah, what I'm taking from all that I think is so powerful for leaders and for me as well, is what I'm hearing is it's a combination of over time learning to trust yourself.
Mhm.
But then from a process standpoint, what I just kind of wrote down is decide and reevaluate, decide and reevaluate,
Mhm.
instead of I make a decision, I execute, God, I hope I got the decision right.
Mhm.
It's like, no, just keep deciding and reevaluating it.
100%.
And sailing is probably not probably sailing is such a good metaphor for that, because if you decide and reevaluate, you can deal with anything. But if you take too long and you don't decide,
Yeah.
you may be shit out of luck
Yeah. You
at
miss
that point.
opportunities. And, as I got older in my Olympic career, I realized that, it's better to make a decision and back yourself on it. And then, like you said, adapt or reevaluate from there rather than be indecisive and kind of be stuck in the middle with it.
How was kind of skipping forward to Paris in 2024?
Mhm.
How was that? Was that journey much different than the journey to get to Tokyo in 2020? And if so, what was different about it for you?
Yeah, I would say for Paris, I felt more like a veteran on the race course. I definitely felt a lot more confident and I didn't struggle with like that paralysis by analysis necessarily. I felt like I had the reps under my belt and felt a lot more confident. And I'd say what I struggled with more in the Paris quad was keeping the energy and momentum. It's so intense and you're working so hard for this one goal. And, like I said earlier, there were so many things that we were managing outside of just being athletes. And so I was really managing burnout in the approach to Paris. And, it's really hard to admit that as an athlete or any high performer. You don't ever want to relinquish and admit that. So that was something I struggled with, it was very hard. Yeah.
What is that? I want to dig into that burnout
Yeah.
a little bit more. What what did that actually look like and feel like for you? Your version of burnout. I imagine that's probably very different in different people,
Yeah.
but what did that look like and feel like for you?
It stemmed from a couple of things. In 2023, we had 4 major events that we were in podium contention for on the last day of all those events. One of them being the Olympic test event, which is basically a dress rehearsal for the Olympics, and one of them being the World Championship. And we ended up not closing out on any of those 4 regattas. And I walked away at the end of the summer in 2023, just kind of, completely defeated. And, I felt like I was putting everything I had into performance. And I felt like I was, on the right track. We were doing all the right things, but we just couldn't seal the deal. And you can only stay optimistic and positive for so many of those things. And so at the end of 2023 season, I just started really feeling that burnout of, okay, I'm taking on so much, I'm doing so much. I feel like I'm on the right path for the results. And we were being supported in that with the US OPC, with the US sailing team, with our coaches. And we all, felt like we were on this right path. And we just weren't closing out. And so that was just a really hard one to swallow.
Yeah, and again, interestingly enough, just like when you were talking about your struggle in 2020 around decision making, and that relates very much to business leaders, the idea of burnout
Yeah.
absolutely relates. And feeling, and man, I could remember, thankfully, my coaching business has been going really well, I'd say, for the last 12 years or so. But I went through about 7 years of my business life with real struggles and feeling like I'm doing everything and I'm not winning.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is everybody else around me winning and I'm
Totally.
working my butt off and I'm not winning? It hurts. And yes, it's frustrating, but more than anything, like you said, you feel defeated
Yeah.
and it's very hard to move forward. So I know, like me, other business leaders have felt the same way. There may be some folks listening that are feeling that way right now. So what helped you when you talk about going from that burnout to kind of keeping that energy and that momentum that you need to perform at such a high level? What were some of the things that allowed you to make that shift from that feeling of defeat to having the energy and momentum?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I really focused on connecting to my why. Why was I doing this? Why was I showing up every day? Why was I sacrificing, on situations at home or with my family or personal life for this one goal? And then the other thing was reconnecting to the joy that sailing brought me. I would think back to 5-year-old Steph who was on the water back at home, it just purely loving being on the water and, the sensations that our boat provides of like the boat would take off and fly underneath you and my hair whipping in the wind and, all of the elements like that, really connecting to that joy and then the why. And I think I said this at the business lunch that we had together. So my why initially was because I really envisioned myself standing on the podium. And then I realized that, sailing is a sport where there's so much out of your control. It's very hard to consistently be on the podium. It's just hard to execute all the time, right? But what I really connected to was the challenge of becoming better every day. And that's what I refocused on in the fall of 2023.
Yeah, I think what's interesting and so important about what you're saying is, there have been, dozens and dozens of books written on how to figure out your why. And obviously Simon Sinek,
Mhm.
is the king of, of all that. And critically important. I have my why. I coach my leaders on that. But I think you added something that's really important, because if we focusing on the why is important,
Mhm.
but if we continue to focus on our why, but we're not getting there, we're not achieving what we want to achieve, I think you could still feel defeated. But what you added to that was focusing on, like loving the water
Mhm.
and focusing on just the process and doing the things. I could remember I've told this story before on stage and maybe in another podcast, when I was really struggling in my business and I had hooked up in my mind, and it's a very shallow way to think, but hey, we're all shallow from time to time. I hooked up in my mind that success meant having a nice car. Like, I was driving an old crappy used car. I'd see all these people in their BMWs and Mercedes,
Mhm.
and like, why could they afford those cars and I can't? And I finally got to the point that my business was a level that I went out and picked up my first BMW. And I was as I was growing my business, I was in heaven that I was finally growing it and things were working. And then I went and picked up the car, and I felt this wave of depression come over me
Yeah.
at a level I'd never felt before. And I said, I don't understand. Like, I just achieved
Yeah.
something I've been working to achieve for a number of years. Why am I feeling that way? And what I realized with the help of my coach is, it's a car. A car doesn't change your life.
Mhm.
And frankly, reaching a goal doesn't typically change your life all that much. What changes your life is the
Yeah.
journey getting there. And it's about enjoying the journey, because if you wait till this magic day you achieve everything you want to achieve, number one, we keep raising the bar.
Yeah.
As soon as we get there, well, we got to, I won a world championship. Now I have to be an Olympic
Yeah.
champion. Now I have to be we keep raising the bar. So we end up never being happy. But if you, like you said, just come to grips with, hey, I love the water and I get to do this every day. And you've got those two things together, I think really help us with that energy and motivation.
100%. Definitely.
So I know you are now transitioning who you are and your career from just sailing. And
Mhm.
I'd say just sailing, it's not like you're stopping
Yes.
that, but from, just sailing to now you want to help other people, with their mindset. Talk a little bit about, and I know this is a journey for you that you're at the beginning of,
Yes.
and you're starting to coach and you've got a client, and I know you're working on some certifications, doing a whole lot of things. We talked about, which are phenomenal, but tell me a little bit more about the kinds of folks that you work with and want to work with, and where your coaching focuses, where you think they need the most help.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm really enjoying this journey. I'm learning a lot, and it's fun to relate what I learned as an athlete into these new principles. But I would say I respect anyone who has a goal and wants to become better at anything. And I love the process, like I said earlier, of becoming better and that challenge of high performance. The Olympic campaign provided so many opportunities to just find that 1%. And that was so exciting to me. And, our sailing skills got to a very high level, but then if you're approaching from a holistic view, it's like, well, how do we dial in our sleep more? How do we dial in our nutrition more? How do we dial in our communication more? How do we become more efficient at putting our boat together so we waste less hours in the sun? How do we strategize, who's doing what when it comes to boat maintenance, those kinds of things. And so I just really loved that puzzle of like, where do we find these little 1%? And I am just excited to work with, my heart is obviously with athletes. I would love to work with high performing athletes, but then there's, the athletes who are looking to take their game from good to great. And then there's high performers in business as well. And as, we're having this conversation, we're definitely highlighting how many translatable skills there are between being an athlete and business. And so really I'm excited to work with any high performers, but my heart is definitely with athletes.
When you think about the high performers and the kinds of focus that they, you talked about, sleep, nutrition, mindset, and a number of other things. When you think about the high performers, and I think we talked about two of the areas, one around decision making, we've talked about the energy and
Mhm.
motivation. But when it comes to, the stress of trying to be the best at something, the anxiety of trying to be the best at something, the level of confidence you
Yeah.
need to build, in addition to decision making and keeping that energy and momentum, what would be another important area of kind of having that performance mindset? What would be another area that you found as something that was a struggle and beneficial for you to work on that you think others should be thinking about and working on?
Oh, there's so many things. Something that comes to mind is like awareness and mindfulness. I really honed in on my mindfulness because I felt like if I was in the present moment in racing, I was in that flow state. I wasn't overthinking things. I was just doing things. And that was a really beautiful place to be in. And when the best results came, but that comes from an awareness and mindfulness. So I really would do a lot of meditation. I would symbols on our boat that would catch my attention so I could refocus my energy. So that was a big thing. Also self-talk, that's a really big one as well. We have a tendency to beat ourselves up so much. And that was something that I worked on a lot when I had that paralysis by analysis is I would make a decision and then if it was the wrong one, I would get so frustrated with myself. And so I really worked on that self-talk and creating mantras for myself. And like one that I used before the Olympics was if I found my focus distracted or if I found myself reacting negatively to a situation or decision I made, I would say to myself, accept, breathe, scan. And so that was just a loop in my head. And anytime a poor decision was made, okay, I accept that I made that decision, breathe through it, and then scan the race course for opportunities. And that really helped me refocus myself. And mantras as well. I am brave was one that I used a lot because I would get really nervous before a competition, but if I really channeled my inner brave self, I didn't care about those nerves. I didn't feed into them. So there's so many tools, and it's so exciting to kind of think about how we can apply them in business or in sport.
And what about in being part of a team with Maggie?
Mhm.
You talked about the communication piece of it. What was another area that you found from a not only being a high performance individual but a high performance team? What was another critical area that you and Maggie had to focus on to make sure you were a strong team?
Accountability.
Hmm.
We would talk about changes we'd want to make in communication, for example, and we'd have to hold ourselves and each other accountable to those changes, holding ourselves accountable to showing up to the sports psychology work that we wanted to do, holding ourselves accountable to the processes that worked for each of us individually and then together. And so I think accountability was a really big factor for that.
And what did that actually look like? Like, was it just saying, hey, I need you here, or hey, where were you? Or like,
Mhm.
what did you actually do to hold each other accountable?
Well, first of all, we committed to that and understood that sometimes it was not going to be very pretty. It's like I said, you're tired from training, you're tired from traveling, you're tired from managing all the other things that were going on in the background. But and so sometimes, accountability was not presented as pretty as it should be, but at the end of the day, we knew that we were in it together to achieve the same goal and knew that if the other person was calling the other one out on something, that it was because it was to get us better for that ultimate goal.
Yeah, and again, all those relate so well to the business world
Mhm.
where one of the things on a leadership team, I often say is it's not the CEO's job to hold everybody else accountable. It's the leadership team's job to hold each themselves and each other accountable.
Yeah.
And it sounds like yes, it was a smaller two-person team,
Yeah.
but it sounds like it was exactly the same thing. So you're in Tokyo in 2020, Paris 2024. 2028. Any thoughts about, doing it again,
Well,
or is that out of the question?
it's so tempting because it's a home games and that would be really special to be at home. But I certainly acknowledge and respect the fire that needs to be burning to be successful. And I've done 2 Olympic Games. If I were to do this again, I'm going for a medal, and it would have to be a massive commitment. And right now that fire isn't burning, which is really hard to admit. But I think, I also just really respect how good everyone is at the Olympic level. And you can't just hop in, obviously, and do it. So I think right now I'm just really enjoying this process of learning coaching and connecting with people like you to just absorb as much as I can about this new industry that I'm hopping into.
Yeah, and I know that, I think I know the value you could add to others, maybe initially around sports, but obviously as we're learning together, even more so in the time we're spending, how much of this relates to business is critical as
Indeed.
well. So if someone did want to find out more about you and get in touch with you, what's the best way of them finding you and finding out more?
Right now, connect on LinkedIn. I am in the process of building a website and branding, which is really exciting. So connecting on LinkedIn or even Instagram. And I would appreciate and welcome any connections.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, hey, as I always say, if you want a great company, you need a great leadership team. Stephanie, thanks for getting us there today. This is great.
Thank you for having me. It was a real honor to be here today and share my journey with you.